Welcome everyone to our CAER webinar. We're going to start by taking a minute to walk through the logistics and ground rules for this webinar. So first of all, this webinar will be recorded. The recording will be transcribed and made available online following the call. All attendees' phone lines are muted and in listen-only mode. The question and answer session will be held after the presentations, but questions can be sent in advance. To do that, you can ask a question by typing in the questions box here in the control panel. If you can't see the questions box, be sure to toggle open the section of the control panel up here. You may type a question at any time, and we strongly encourage you to do so. You can type them as we go through the webinar, and then we'll address them at the end. If the control panel has minimized, click twice the orange button on the Grab tab here. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Joe now to get us started.
Thank you, Sarah. This is Joe Mancino with US EPA. I thank everybody for joining our webinar today. As you see on the topic slide for today, we're going to have a short overview of the e-enterprise and CAER goals. Then I'm going to go into the implementation plan and specifically the formation of the product design team and what they're doing right now as it relates to the CAER objectives. And then we have two project updates. These are pretty significant updates, and so you'll see in the slides there's a pretty decent amount of time allocated to these. One is on the facility registry system data model update, and that will be by Matt Kelly with EPA's Office of Environment Information. And then also an update on the Federal Registry System crosswalk with the Risk Technology Review Project. And that will be provided by Mark Huyu of US EPA, Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. And then lastly, as Sarah said, we'll have opportunity for questions and answers as well. So I'd like to get started on the next slide then, Sarah, with the participant poll question.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll right now that everyone can participate in, just find out what type of organization everyone's associated with. So that is open now. All right, looks like we have most of the votes in, but we'll give it just a few more seconds for the rest of you to get your answers in. All right, close the poll, and you can see the results here. So it looks like we have majority industry this time. All right, and I'll pass it back over to Joe.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And looks like we have a good mix of representation today, so that's good to share the information we have on today's webinar. So with that, wait till the next slide comes up here. And just hold on a second as it presents itself. There we go. So for those who may not be familiar with e-enterprise and the project at CAER, I wanted to just give a quick, very brief overview of what that entails. The e-enterprise for the environment is it's a jointly governed collaboration between state, locals, and tribal programs and the EPA, with the principal focus to modernize business processes. There's a number of different projects engaged with under this umbrella of e-enterprise right now. The CAER project, the Combined Air Emissions Reporting Project, of which today's subject matter is about, is one of them. They all have the kind of basic fundamental goals of improving environmental results through enhanced services both to the regulated community and the public. And like I said, by increasing the use of modern business practices, streamlining data flow, making data more timely and available, and just generally improving the systems on which data flows across the different programs. So one aspect of e-enterprise, it can be seen as a relatively new way of working together among EPA and state and local tribal programs, in that there's a very early collaboration on the identification and definition of the problems that are being solved, developing solutions, and moving in a very iterative process, working towards those solutions, so that there's really very large amount of engagement right from the start, as opposed to what might be a traditional government project or a regulation, as an example, where it's more of a response to something that comes out. This is very much a from the get-go collaborative effort. And for CAER, this has been very effective in terms of being able for us to hear from the different collaborators and people that are involved to help change the ideas on the design of the project and getting continued input along the way. This has helped us to revise their approaches in some cases and redesign and like I said, do things on an iterative basis so you continually adjust and make things work towards a collaborative solution. And these details and input we get through a variety of input efforts. These webinars that we have, the public webinars, there's a number of CAER sub-teams that are related to the project, and I'll talk about one of those teams today, the product design team. And then there's other voluntary opportunities through listservs and email sites that we'll cover at the end of this webinar and refresh and remind people of those opportunities as well to be involved. The next slide, Sarah. Okay, so I just wanted to go over the CAER goals. The CAER project seeks to establish a streamlined and shared emissions reporting system with the goals listed here. Principal among those is reducing industry burden for point source reporting. CAER is focused on streamlining the process and making it more efficient for industry reporters by the conceptual basis of a common entry point and distribution of emissions data to the various programs that need the data, instead of having numerous individual programs to report to. Secondly, improving the timeliness and transparency of data. The concept of this shared emissions platform is being looked at in terms of being able to move data quicker to programs and to users, end users being the public or industry users, and as well as EPA for emission inventory purposes. Third goal is to ensure consistent information across programs. As it exists now, there's oftentimes duplication in reported emissions data, sometimes inconsistent data for what should be the same data element occurs from time to time. The development of this type of shared system would hopefully eliminate those occurrences or dramatically reduce them. The next goal is to improve data quality, and this can happen through a number of ways by one, ensuring that there's a consistent, utilizing the consistent best available data element and data input for emissions data reporting across the programs, and also creating opportunities to use shared services in terms of emission factors, having access to the best available emission factor data and have that readily available in inventory programs through applications and shared services and access to those emission factor data. And then the next goal is to improve accessibility and usability of the data. Again, this gets to presenting the data in a timely format and in a place that can be readily used and accessed by a variety of end users for emissions data. And then lastly, to support more timely decision making. A lot of times it takes a while for data elements or data reported through the different programs to move its way through pretty much functionalities of the systems. And what we hope to accomplish here is look at this and making these processes more efficient to move that data along so that it can be used for a variety of decision processes. And these are both, government and state, local, and as well as industry's decisions on how they want to move forward on particular aspects of their facilities. And so I'll go to the next slide now regarding the governance structure under CAER. Right now we're in the phase of the implementation plan that was developed last year in August of 2016. The CAER implementation plan established what we call a product design team, PDT. And the figure C here kind of shows the structure, illustrates the structure of this product design team. And it consists of state and local tribal programs and EPA personnel on the product design team. It's a 12-member team. And from that team, developed an initial priority list of supporting activities to support the CAER objectives. One thing I'd like to emphasize is that CAER is not like a singular project piece unto itself. What CAER consists of is this goal of reaching a shared emissions system, but as you can realize, that involves a lot of different projects and preliminary work that has to go to begin to just start to piece together this conceptual basis and then turn it into an actual design eventually of applications and software that would help actually make the functional pieces work. So it's always good to think of it as an initial set of priority activities for the PDT was a set of R&D projects. We call them research and development projects, and that's what you see on the right-hand side of the program is the R&D teams, which are relatively small teams, again, of state and local and EPA collaborators, developing from the initial priority list individual projects related to different aspects of CAER support activities that move the ball along in terms of reaching the goal of the CAER emissions shared emissions platform and system. It depends a lot on involvement of these teams with outreaching to broader teams. A lot of these teams have a number of members who are in contact with other program developers and inventory program people, so there's a far reach from amongst these small teams as they develop their projects. And each of them incorporate what we call in this agile process. It's a term often used in software development, but it's generally a philosophy on all the e-enterprise work. And again, it gets back to moving in iterative steps. The agile process incorporates iterative steps, and particularly it's applicable to software pieces that are part of the solution to the CAER objective, and that you develop from very small, short periods of time, get input, feedback, redesign, revise, and then move forward for the next step. But this is a similar process to all the projects that they keep in mind. That's generally where the CAER implementation is right now in terms of the product design team, and I'll talk a little bit about the projects here on the next slide. Next slide. At this slide, this slide just reviews the makeup of the R&D teams. As I said, it's a small number of experts in the topic areas of each of the priority projects. Relatively short time frame of 4 to 6 months to solve, like I said, a specific problem related to CAER implementation. And the form and function of each team is up to the team to decide in terms of the actual steps that are used to produce the product. The key takeaways from this slide, the first round of R&D projects began early this year, scheduled for completion by June 2017 timeframe. And all the projects are designed in a way to support the CAER objectives in terms of developing a shared emission platform. And for example, one of the aspects that each of the projects takes into mind is there a way to transfer the procedure? For example, if there's a procedure involved, a QA/QC procedure, for example, how to translate that into an automated process that can be incorporated into some type of automated entry point or automated reporting system in terms of the CAER conceptual design. And that automation obviously would provide efficiency gains. So on the next slide, I want to describe briefly go through the 5 projects that are in this first round of R&D. We get to there we go. There's 5 projects shown there on the slide for this first round. First one is QA/QC procedures in terms of identifying a common set of emissions data QA/QC procedures for emissions reporting. Again, this is for point sources. The second one is a deep dive into looking at the mapping of emission data between the EPA's GHG mandatory reporting program and a number of states that have their own reporting programs for greenhouse gases, and see how these matches would occur and how the consistencies across these as a preliminary step in determining where the business case is and and whether there's issues involved with making those matches in terms of sharing the data between those systems. The third project is related to a crosswalk between the toxics release inventory, the national emission inventory, and the state and local tribal programs in terms of looking at the consistency and workflows of sharing emissions data between these inventory programs. And this is phase 1, which is principally focused on the pollutant definitions, the coding, so that you can actually talk the same about the same data element across these programs, and then turn that into moving the data and sharing it between them and getting them on the same basis. The fourth one is the emissions data design project, and this is focused on establishing and identifying what you can think of as a core set of emissions data elements or fields to support reporting through what we call in a common emissions form. And the common emissions form is this concept of a place to report the emissions, and from which would be a platform where emissions would be distributed to a state and local system or to an EPA program. It's the basis for where the applications and the software approaches would be established in terms of making connections. But the first part in all of that is establishing what would be a core set of emissions data elements that could cover the basis across the different programs in terms of emissions data. And the last project right now underway is the SCC emission factor. And SCC is source classification code. It's a code for defining processes at a facility. And the work here is to look at identifying solutions and problems associated with matching SCCs and emission factors from emission factor sources like WebFire, making these linkages and connections so that they can be used particularly in calculations for the inventories, and also to ensure the highest quality results in terms of getting the best available emission factor data matched appropriately to SCCs and available in a way that can be then applied and accessed through this common emissions form concept. So again, a building block to a greater goal, right? And so that's if you think of it as the purpose of all these R&D projects right now, that's a good way to approach it. Okay, I'm done with the overview now, and I think we should move on to the next part of the presentation, where Matt Kelly will be discussing the facility data model.
All right, thank you, Joe. Hi, my name is Matt Kelly. I'm with the Office of Environmental Information, and I help manage a program called the Facility Registry Service. So I know there's a lot of people on the call who have familiarity with the program and some who don't, so we'll just start from the top real quick and just say that there are really 3 main goals of FRS. We look to integrate data, and we do that in a number of different ways. We look to improve that data, and pretty much the same thing. We do that in a number of ways. Then we provide that data back out. In the form of integrating data, we have technology that supports the collection of information from reporters. So if you've used Try Me Web, you've probably used our facility lookup widget. It's the same technology that actually Mark is going to be showing wireframes for right after my presentation here. We also have system-to-system integration to try to pull data in and give one snapshot for a facility for all of the environmental interests that may go on at that facility. So we do that by trying to compare the address, the facility name, the location, and other key identifiers to try to mash all of this data up to give that snapshot of a particular location. So we have about 4.7 million facilities in FRS now. The number is always growing, and so the data in FRS is used for a lot of different ways. So for analysis or reporting, we've got major linkages to ISIS, so we share data. There's a help enforcement with rulemaking or even emergency response. So on the next slide, we have a little bit of an overview on the new facility data model. So I think I've presented to this group before just to talk about some changes that were happening in FRS to better meet requirements that are found at the state level as well as the EPA program level. So it took about 2 years to roll out, and with Office of AER's requirements being accounted for in this first version, our new facility data model allows a lot of new and great things to happen. First and foremost is the management of sub-facility information and data. So previously the facility data model was incredibly rigid and had baked in essentially sub-facility relationship to regular facility that didn't meet other programs. And so we had to essentially build it out so that all of these facility, sub-facility, complex facility data elements are all essentially on the same level, and we're simply tracking the relationship of these pieces with each other. So you'll see the example with RTR in a couple minutes, but the RTR project is essentially how the new model can be leveraged for a very specific media. And we've built it out so that other program offices can easily add in their data elements and have their requirements met in a more simple way. So we also have more robust history tracking for facility information. So previously we didn't necessarily date stamp everything in FRS, and so now we have a much better ability to track data as it's entered into FRS or modified in FRS. We're also able to track relevant dates like permit start dates and end dates, and then we can also now provide a snapshot in time of what that facility may have looked like, using the data that is derived in the automated and manual processes. So this includes a couple data elements such as facility name and ownership, contacts, and even the configuration. So what that facility, may have looked like at a given moment, like I said, based on what data is integrated in FRS. So we also have the ability now to view a facility profile from multiple perspectives. So previously, FRS kind of boiled things to the facility level, and that's all you can really see. So there might have been environmental interest. It was maybe a water permit that was associated with the facility, and we didn't know anything beyond that. But now with this new facility data model, we can better tailor the facility data needs to program-specific interests. And so you see Office of AER version and the AER regulatory programs version of that facility and query it back out in certain ways, whereas previously we weren't able to do that. And this idea is also captured with the idea of a conceptual group, so that a permit might be written to a set of boilers, for instance, and now the facility data model can much better handle the association of those conceptual groups with the facility, or those conceptual groups with individual boilers that might be at the facility that might be collected by another regulatory program. So the fourth one here is really just an effort to better provide the data in the context of data as it relates to regulatory requirements. So it's kind of the idea of what that permit is written to. It might not be that facility as a whole, but it might actually be to a specific component there. So we're trying to provide that more granular clarification for what might actually be at the facility and why it's of environmental interest to EPA or states. So in the last one there is just some more robust abilities to associate facility, their components with organizations and contacts, and once again, just to give a better snapshot of what the facility is and any other important information that might be relevant to the public or EPA or states. So on the next slide, we have a little bit more detail on the facility data model as it is today. So in the background, we've just have our ERD, or entity relationship diagram, and I've superimposed some big boxes here just to kind of lay out what the data model tries to capture and associate. So it's best to start in the bottom right corner where we have what we call the core component attributes table. And these attributes may be represented in a number of different ways. We really try to collect specific element information so that we can properly associate and display the information so that you can know what the facility name is, what the type of the component is, if it has an operating status or an address, city, state, zip. All of this information is critical to be able to understand and associate with other information. So the term component, however, it really covers a broad range of data. And it goes up to the complex facility where you might have an airport that has facilities on there that might be of environmental interest, and then there might even be sub-facilities on those facilities at that complex facility. So as you can probably understand, these things tend to get really complex, and this new data model is able to store these all in one location and like I mentioned before, manage the association of these components with each other. You know, it is important to note that we have a real core component set of attributes here that applies to all components that we might integrate in FRS. And where the variance occurs is where you find the component attribute tables up above. And so you see some of the AIR-specific component attributes, such as release point information or emission unit information. And so this is where we have essentially carved out some space so that other program offices or other states who have other attributes that they want to more granularly describe than the core component table, we simply add those attribute tables and then store in a key relationship between the two tables, you know, the way that they're described in more detail. So this is where we've allowed expansion of the model so that, you know, Office of Air or Toxics can more granularly describe what is in FRS and, you know, what it means perhaps at a more granular level. And so then in the top left corner, probably the last thing I'll talk about on this slide is we store all program data. We don't change that program data as it enters FRS. And so we also have the ability then to, you know, kind of pivot on that and provide a program-specific view of the component and the component's relationship to other components. So this is, in a nutshell, just a really brief overview of the new facility data model. It was built with the future in mind so that we don't have to go through another, you know, 2-year-long process to redesign the facility data model. We've built in the ability to expand it easily and to meet other EPA program needs or their state or tribe needs as well. So on the last slide here, I know we were supposed to be talking about what we've been working on since December. So I think that might have been the last call that we had, and I might have had a chance to present out on the new data model that was just after the cutover, or probably say during the cutover. So essentially what are we doing now? We are doing a lot of post-cutover tasks. So we integrate data from about 90 different systems, and so we essentially have to go one by one and update those data mappings. So we've you know, done it with a couple of our high visibility program sets like EnviroFax and ISIS, but there's still a number of program systems that we have to do this post-cutover task for to update our data mappings and ensure that we're refreshing into the correct tables and all that good stuff. And then along the same lines is just simply refreshing the data sets into the new model. So we had to put on pause a couple of our data sets that we refresh on the regular, so we're getting caught up with those, including some state data sets. And then the third one there, we're resolving bugs with the new FRS data quality tool, which is the facility linkage application, and I'll be showing some wireframes for that later on. But essentially we had to develop a brand new version that leverages the new facility data model and allows the curation of sub-facility components and organization and contact data. So we've got an active user base that's reporting issues, and so we're working on those. In the meantime, we are also supporting CAER via the RTR development. Mark's going to show those wireframes in a minute, but essentially it's been a rigorous process to leverage some of the technology that FRS has worked on with other program offices to help collect sub-facility information specifically for the Office of Air. So we're really excited about that one being close to the finish line. We're also working with the facility IPT, which is another e-enterprise project, where we're essentially trying to identify ways to improve the management of facility data as it relates to the states, tribes, and EPA. So we're starting to drill down on a couple different solutions to explore. In particular, trying to figure out how we might be able to provide a shared service to help with the curation of facility data in a state system. So we're hoping to get something on the Exchange network within the next year or so that other states and tribes can leverage to help facilitate the curation of facility data. And then that last bullet is really a long-term roadmap. Is we're evaluating opportunities for other partners to take advantage of the new facility data model. So I know the Office of Air and the staff like Mark and Joe have been great in providing requirements, for the core set of attributes in the facility data model as well as the Office of Air attributes. But now we're beginning to look forward and see what other EPA programs might be able to leverage, this new approach. Office of Water is an office that we'd like to work with eventually. And once again, just to try to bring all of this together in a better understanding of why that particular location is of environmental interest. So that is essentially the overview of the new facility data model. If there's any questions about it, please feel free to contact me, and I could try to answer your questions. But I believe the next presenter is going to be Mark Hoyu, who's going to provide an overview of the FRS RTR project and then an overview of some wireframes.
Okay, hi, this is Mark. So, Sarah, the presentation just went away. What do I need to do?
Sorry about that. Just 1 second. Do you want to just control it from my screen?
Yeah, I think that'd be best.
Okay. Okay, you should have control.
Okay, great. I'm trying to switch to the next slide, and let's see. Come on, Internet. There we go. All right, sorry for that, folks. I'd also, Matt was just saying how you can send Matt questions. You can also type questions into the questions box there on the webinar. So what I want to talk about now is our Risk and Technology Review project, RTR, and how we are using what Matt just described from the FRS to enhance that program. So just a little bit of an overview on what RTR is. The purpose of that program is to evaluate air risks from sectors that have continued emissions, ongoing emissions that are still in existence after the MACT technologies have been applied and other programs have been implemented. And to do this, risk modeling is done, and that needs detailed facility data, all of the attributes about the facility, the emissions, and other data. And to create those modeling files, the RTR program does its own inventory collection processes, usually with spreadsheets, and amends other available information, such as the National Emissions Inventory data, which is used as a starting point, and the NEI data often includes data from the Toxics Release Inventory, or TRI, but it's summed up to the facility level by TRI, and so it wouldn't be detailed enough for RTR. And so that information needs to be augmented to support the RTR program. And to do that, a lot of data is collected that we want to be available to other programs, but currently that's not the case. So for FRS RTR, what we're doing is we're applying the e-enterprise principles that Joe talked about earlier and focusing on things we're trying to do with CAER to improve inventory collection and data sharing. And to do that, we're leveraging the new FRS. So we expect to streamline and standardize the RTR collection of facility attribute information, and also to be able to share that RTR collected facility attribute data with other users in a much more streamlined and readily available approach. Trying to switch slide. There we go. So this slide, you may remember. Oh. Okay, slide 15. This is the proposed future state for the Combined Air Emissions Reporting Project, and I'm not going to go over this whole future state, but I want to just draw your attention to a few things. So as part of this project, we have envisioned that attribute entry or facility attribute entry would be one step, and emissions data entry would be one step. And of course, as I just said, those are both things that are happening under the RTR, and that information on the attributes would go to something that would share the facility attributes, which we just dubbed the shared facility attribute system. And then that information and a number of other things is going on this slide, not the least of which is sharing all that information with the numerous air programs that have been identified as being part of the CAER project. But we're really just focusing in this project on some of the things going on the left-hand side. So if you look at the next slide, slide 16, what I've done here is I've highlighted some of the things and compared what we're doing with FRS RTR compared to this CAER proposed future state. This is not changing what we're doing on the CAER proposed future state. It's just trying to help illustrate what we've chosen to do to move the bar forward for CAER. So right now, for the purposes of this project, our portal that folks would use to access the facility information is CEDRI. And the information would be available, be able to be provided through something that we've called a facility widget, which is created by FRS and is accessed through CEDRI for this project. Could be accessed other places, but that's what we're doing here. And that facility widget allows for the collection of facility attributes, and then those data get sent to the FRS there at the bottom. A few things that we're not doing as part of this project, but that we saw on the CAER diagram. We are not currently planning on pre-populating facility attributes for the emissions entry, as you see here under the future there that's circled. In addition, to the right and under the attributes and emissions entry box, we no longer see a diagram that has us sharing that emissions data with all the programs in a streamlined way. And the reason for that is that while that might eventually be able to happen, that's just not part of this project. And there would be a lag time necessarily with the RTR program since it's a rulemaking-based program. And so the data on the emissions comes out as part of the regulatory process. And then lastly, another thing that we're not currently doing but could ultimately be done is up here at the top above the attribute and emissions entry, where on the prior slide we were pulling emissions available already into the data. In this case, it would be for RTR to show people what they already have. That is not something that we're currently working on, but again, that's something that could be done, just not part of the current project. And then lastly, here at the bottom right circle, because we're not really sharing that information on the emissions in real time, we don't have a shared QA or a shared emissions step as part of this project. So again, we're really focusing on that collection of the facility attributes here at the left, and doing that and demonstrating that through the facility widget. All right, hopefully I just changed one slide. So the next couple of, the next set of slides are screenshots from our existing implementation of the facility widget. These tools are not available publicly, but they are available in our Sorry, folks, my slide screen just switched again. Okay, going back to slide 17. And the ability to access a My Facilities facility management tab is actually provided through the Central Data Exchange and as part of facility services from FRS. So this is currently, this part that you're looking at now is currently available, and it's also currently used by CEDRI for reporting by industry. On subsequent screens, I just want to note, I'm going to drop the headers up here where it has registration information and the EPA header and the CDX. All of those things are going to be dropped from subsequent screenshots just for space purposes, but they would actually be there if you were looking at the real screen on a web page. Okay, so here we have My Facilities. This is zooming in on the list view of the 3 facilities that are currently part of my test environment. And to add facilities, you would need to click on the Add Facilities tab, and then you can search for existing facilities. And you can see here that there's a number of different ways to do that. In this case, I happen to know my facility ID in FRS, so I'm going to just put that in as the most expedient way to do that, and then search for facilities. And then when that FRS goes and does its thing, and again, this is not a live demo, this is just slides so that we won't have live demo issues. Once you search for your facilities, then you get a list, and in this case I just get the one because I've put in the facility ID. So here we have a facility, Langdale Forest Products, and the way, once you've found your facility, you can proceed is to do a couple of things. One, to confirm that your facility is the right facility, you can actually look at a map view. Okay, I guess I'm not to the map view yet. Here I've just selected my facility, and I'm proceeding with the selections to add it to my unsaved facilities list. Should come up next. Okay, here's the unsaved facilities list. So you could go and you could add more facilities prior to saving. In this case, we're just going to add the one, and then I'm going to take a look at this in map view. And up will pop a map. And if I was assuming I'm happy with that, then I can go back to list view to see back to the list, and then save the facilities that have been added to this unsaved facilities list. And then the software will take me back to the list of My Facilities on the My Facilities tab. And you can see in this slide 21 that Langdale Forest Products is now added to my list of facilities. So this is all things that exist now, and what we've been working on in the FRS RTR project is the ability to add some things to the view and edit. So to view or edit the facility, including sub-facility attributes, you would click here on the View Edit Details link. I'm a little afraid I've clicked too many times and it might switch slides on me, but here we go. So on the facility, yeah, there it goes. On the facility view, okay, back here, we have incorporated some needs and input from both the RTR program as well as some user feedback to add some facility level data elements to the widget. So some of these are shown here with the top red box. The operating status change date. If the facility is in a tribal area, you can add a tribal code, facility level NAICS code, responsible agency, that would be the state agency for which the facility reports. And then you can see here at the bottom we have the different summary of the sub-facility information that might be available about that facility. And to edit all of this, you can click on this Edit Facility button. And up pops a similar version of the same tab, but it has boxes now where you can enter information. So you can see here now we've added the operating status, You can enter an operating status change date and do other things. That's the operating status. There's a pull-down menu there, and then that's been changed. And now we have the NAICS code where you can pull down a list and select from a list of valid NAICS codes. And in this case, this is a sawmill, so we've added sawmills. And then when you've made your edits, you would click Submit. And then in this case, we are going to continue on with this facility, and since no sub-facility information has yet been added, we would click on this Add Sub-Facility Components if we needed to add sub-facility information for this facility. When you add sub-facility information, this is part of the screen. Again, I've sort of zoomed in on the part that's important. And you see on the My Facilities tab now we have a new label that says Create Sub-Facility Component. And there's nothing here, no units found. The default is to show us by units. And so we have a need to add a unit. Say we would click on Add Unit. And then we'll go to the next screen and up will pop. Boy, I'm glad I didn't do this in a real demo. Okay, up will pop a Create Unit dialog box. So to save time, I've just illustrated adding all of this information with one click here. But you can kind of get the idea of what is can be added: the alternate unit ID, the unit type. I've given this unit, this boiler unit, a name of Bessie the boiler. Unit description, unit design capacity, and you can choose. You have a units of measure choice here. You can also add units of measure if your units of measure is not there. You can add information about the permit and the permit start year, when the unit was installed, and whether the unit is operating. And then you just click OK to save, and the software takes you back to the list of units. And here we see the list of units now for this facility has been added, and we have this little arrow here allows you to open to get a summary, detailed summary of information here, and then we also have related components associated with this unit shown below, the release points, processes, and control measures. So you have also the ability to add additional units, and instead of taking you through that process, I'm just going to pretend like we've added more units for the sake of expediency. Here's 3 units. We have now Bessie the boiler, Kevin the kiln, and Patty the other process equipment. So Bessie, Kevin, and Patty are all there, but we're going to keep working with Bessie the boiler. And I'm going to, so to save, you would click on the Save Sub-Facility Information. But we are going to continue with adding more information about the boiler. Okay, so again, this little arrow here is going to allow us to open up the details about the boiler, and we can click down here on, to toggle among the different tabs to add different features about this particular unit. And in the case of, it defaults to the release point, so we're going to go ahead and use the Add Release Point link to do just that. You could also use this link to update the release point where you see next to the number where there's no release points there. When you do that, we have a pop-up with a Create Release Point, and the top half of the window is various stack parameters or fugitive release parameters, and the bottom displays a map of the release point. You can see the facility and the default release point location, which is just defaulted to next to the facility location, but as you'll be able to see, we can change that. So we're going to zoom in on the top part of the Create Release Point, and you would enter an alternate release point ID if you have one. I've done that there, and then you can also select the release point type, There's a list of types that has been coordinated within OAQPS to support the RTR program. These are also potentially relevant for the NEI program or for state programs. So we've selected a vertical stack. And then again, in the interest of expediency, I have just filled in the rest of the information. You do get to choose a couple of different units on your diameter and your velocity. And then the gas flow rate is computed automatically from that information in this case. So then at the bottom of the screen, I'm zoomed in on the bottom of that create release point screen. You can use the map to set the latitude and longitude of the particular release point. You can zoom out to kind of see a better picture of your facility. Zooming out twice. Okay, so there's a bigger picture of our facility. I happen to know my release point's over there. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to take the cursor and move that release point on over to where I know the release point is at the facility. And after you've done that, then you can click OK and be done. And that would save your release point. You can see up here at the top, the release point coordinates have been changed, and you are also able to manually type in those release points. So to add another release point, of course, you could use the add another release point. But we're going to move on to processes. And to do that, you would come over here to the process tab. Oh, yeah, this is just pointing out that now we have the one release point here associated with this boiler. So we're going to move over to the process tab. And as you might expect, there's no processes added yet. So we would just add the process to the unit again by clicking on the add process to unit, or to update the number of processes associated with that particular unit. And you do that, you get another pop-up that allows you to create the process. It has the capability of adding an alternate process ID. I've just typed that in there. And then the second piece here is for the source classification code that's used to describe the emissions process. Now, to do that, what we've done is we have used results from a prior project. It was a CAER short-term win, where we have now an SEC search page that's hosted by OEI. And so when you click on this, it actually goes to that search page, which we're going to look at right now. This is what the SEC search page looks like. It's not embedded in the widget, but the way this is working, and we're actually still working on this piece. There's a couple of things that we're still working on, but you go to this separate website, and then when you select your SEC, it feeds it back to the widget. So in this example, I'm just going to enter a search criteria and then search for that criteria because I know I have an industrial boiler. I happen to know that this particular industrial boiler burns biomass, so I'm going to click on the link for that group of SECs and get a number of different options that I can use. And this particular SEC is a wood bark-fired boiler, so I'm going to click on that and get to my final selection of the SEC. So after you've done that, then you go back to the SEC process screen, and the SEC is filled in. I haven't done it here, but at that point, your code would actually be, the explanation of that code would actually be listed here on this window. I just didn't mock that up. And then you also, when you define processes, need to indicate which release point they're associated with. So you can get your list of release points, and in this case, we've already added the stack that this boiler goes to, so we just select that. When you do that, you then get another little box that's going to pop up that shows you that release point, and you would need to determine or indicate whether the allocation of that process to the release point is a certain percentage. When you do that, it actually has some capability of doing some automatic checking. Now, in this case, there's just one release point and one process, so 90% wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. But you could imagine if you had a couple of different processes the process going to a couple of different release points, you would just want some help making sure that it adds up to 100, and that's been built in here. And so this is just illustrating that, but I'm going to correct that to 100. And then when you're done, and you're not going to have any more errors from the 100, so you click OK, and now your process has been added. So after all these dialogues, we end up going back to this main sub-facility component screen. And now we see our one process has been added to our facility, and we can move on to control measures using the control measures tab. We don't have time today to go through all the details there. We have added those features, and there's a number of really neat things that can be done. But in the interest of time, we're just going to illustrate here that there's nothing there initially. After you've added control measures, we're not going to go through that process. You would see something like what we'll show next. So then here on the main screen where we have our units, you can see now that I've added 2 control measures to that particular boiler. So once you're done, you would need to click on the Save Sub-Facility Information down here at the bottom left. When you do that, there's some automatic checks that are done. In this case, it's telling me that I have units that don't have processes or control measures and other types of warnings. This is all potentially fine depending on your particular facility. In some cases, these things don't make sense, but you're still able to save your information and come back later and address any additional warnings that you need to address for whatever purpose. And you would know that because it would, depending on the program that you're reporting to, you may need to have that information correct, and that would get caught in the process. But as far as just saving it in the widget, you can go ahead and save it. So now in this screen, we've come back to the edit facility. You can see here at the bottom that we now have our 3 units that have been added in the summary, the 1 release point, the 1 process, and the 2 control measures. And then once you click on the submit button, the data actually gets sent to CEDRI, and CEDRI will communicate with FRS. So that's the end of my little demo there. I did want to talk one slide about some next steps. So on the FRS RTR project, we feel like all of this very detailed user input will meet the needs of some users, but we also know that there's a fair number of users that have expressed an interest in being able to upload that same sort of information from a spreadsheet-based bulk upload, so we're working on that now. We will continue to coordinate with the CEDRI team to make sure that these different pieces all interact seamlessly. And the CEDRI team is actually responsible for being able to publish the sub-facility approach. So we are working with them to get that done. We also, as resources allow, we will be able to make additional interface refinements. At this point, we're really waiting until we can get this in the hands of actual users to be able to get that type of information. We are working towards a deployment of the software in August. That could be sooner, could be later, depending on a variety of things that are happening. And as you may know, things are in flux here at EPA with different programs, and so we're just working through that. And what we are hoping right now that we can actually release this capability officially in CEDRI by August. And then lastly, we will expect to have, as this is used, further refinements made as based on user input. So that is, I think, all I have. And now we're going to go back to Matt to talk about what would happen after this data comes into FRS and the curation process that is done at FRS.
All right, great. Thanks, Mark. And that was a great walkthrough right there on some technology jointly developed with the Office of AER and OEI. So to kind of continue on to Mark's story there, so the data had been received by the program, and it had been associated with some master records, perhaps, in FRS, and then you say, well, what happens? So there may be a need to go in there and to link that facility and its components to existing facility and components. For whatever reason, maybe the automatic merging process may have overlooked something, and so that's when our network of data stewards steps in, and they use the facility linkage application, which is our data quality tool in FRS, to make those changes. So As I mentioned, the FLA is a data quality tool that's used by our data stewards, and we've got data stewards in all the regions. We've got them in a couple states. Some of the EPA programs are even data stewards, all trying to increase the quality of data for FRS and for EPA. So here's just a list of some of the general functions that are found within the FLA in case you're still wondering what the heck this thing is. You're able to make changes to a master record only for a facility name, an address, or location. And, as I mentioned earlier, we don't touch program data. We try to keep the integrity of that data perfectly in line with what it was when it was reported to FRS. So that master facility record is what is being adjusted throughout this whole process here. So the second function here is a merging. So let's say that if a duplicate master record had been created in FRS, so we are able to then merge the two records and have one of those serve as a new program record, so that we can, next time it's reported on, again, it is correctly associated with an already existing facility. Now, let's say that the reverse happened. Let's say that our automatic merging process thought that there were two records that were the same. So now we have the ability to, for both facility and subfacility, delete that record so that we associate it with a brand new master record instead of one that already exists. We also have some functions there to be able to find duplicates. Just one of the number of ways to try and increase data quality in FRS. We've got some reports that do that very same thing and allow you to then do the functions described above. And then, of course, we can edit the location, so we can change the lat and long for a given master facility record. And then we could also perhaps use a program's lat long to be our best pick for FRS. And it's important to note that we also have different ways to describe that point in particular, so we include the method and accuracy descriptions. So on the next slide is a screenshot of the FLA. It's a wireframe. So this is essentially a details page for a given facility record. This is essentially the building block, and this is what you would see serve as the ability to manage the subfacility component data as it relates to a high-level facility. So as I mentioned, this is just a wireframe. It looks slightly different in production, but you can see in the top left we have the facility location along with its name. On the right we've got a pin on the map that uses our lat long to derive that point. And then you can see in between the map and the facility location information, just a list of all of the different units, release points, processes, controls, permitted features, and groups for that given location. I just want to mention that as I said earlier, that we have the ability to now expand and include other program offices' version of a subfacility component. So that list right there will grow over time, and this accounts for Office of AER's requirements, as we worked with them for over 2 years on. This is really the launch point for a steward to be able to manage facility data in FRS. We've got the major functions here I described on the previous slide, where you can edit the location, the duplicates and linkages about halfway through the page. And then down below we've got program data. So you can see here we've got a couple, for this example, we've got 2 programs, CEDRI and TRI, that have reported the facility name as such, and the address, and the city, state, and zip, and then the interest type. And so that linkage has already been made between CEDRI and TRI, and it's represented here on this details page. And then down below we've got another CEDRI record that looks like it was reported at another time. It also serves to help form the overall impression of what that facility is and what's of environmental interest for it. So on the next slide, I believe we have just wireframes for how to manage unit data. So let's just say that on the previous slide you wanted to manage the linkage or the relationship of a program's units to that master facility record. This is essentially where it's done. You can see across the top we have a ribbon here that kind of helps a user orient around which particular subfacility component they're managing. So we've got units selected there, and then we've got a unit type here and maybe an alternate name to describe it at a more granular level. And then of course we've got some groups, and then just to the right of that, we've got controls, processes, and release points in that same table up above. And this is essentially documenting the relationship of the units with the controls, processes, and release points at that facility. So then down below the report, you can see the transfer point there. It has some more information. It's really important to note that this information is derived from the program data itself. This is not data that FRS is figuring out or adding ourselves. It is literally what is being reported to FRS and displayed for users here. And so then you have a lot of the common functionality here that I described on the previous page, like the ability to select the location for this transfer point. But there's one new function that I want to point out. It's the association. So you're able to now associate this transfer point with other components at the facility, something we weren't able to do before. So then you could see it take form in a number of these reports, but just wanted to point out the piece of functionality that we have there. So then on the next slide it looks very similar, but it's for release points. So this has the ability to integrate and associate release point data with, once again, the controls and the processes at the facility. So you have some stacks. Okay, I think this one's actually processes, okay, there's release points, perfect. So as you can see, we've got a lot of the same types of information and data, the same types of functions to be able to manage this information. And so you've got the name there, stack, and the alternate name, describing where it might be at a more granular level. And on the right, if a program collects the lat longs for a given facility, we can then map it on a map, just to make sure that it is the actual one that is integrated with this facility. And then down below, we've got a release point program data, which once again, we can associate that with already existing release points in FRS. And we've got some other more granular description of what the sub-facility component is, so the height and diameter and the velocity. A lot of the same data elements that you saw Mark present on in RTR, and you would see maybe a couple more if we had updated wireframes for this. So on the next slide, we've got processes, and it's kind of the same deal. A lot of the same functions, a lot of the same data, being able to associate it with the different controls and release points, all that good stuff. And so we could probably just breeze through to the next one as well. Where I think we're showing their controls. So it's the same thing. As programs flow data to FRS, there's always going to be a question of whether or not that already exists, and if it does, how could we link that program record to an already existing master record? So this is for controls data. So you have the control name, the control ID. Perhaps this is an ID that is generated in Sedgery. Ideally, we take that ID and essentially have it be the unique identifier for that sub-facility component, and then we use that to then help try to match up with other programs' version of it. So then you can see here we've got some control program data down below. This is where we can, once again, manage the associations of controls with the different sub-facility components at a facility. And then finally, we just have a wireframe of a stack group on the next slide. And so this is just the ability to manage the groups that you saw on the very first slide. These are potentially conceptual groups, or they are they're groups that are used across a number of different EPA programs, but this is essentially where you're able to create and manage the association of sub-facility components as it relates to a group, and then how that group relates to a given facility. So, as you can probably gather from a lot of these slides here, is that the work is relatively complex, both on the development of services to help correct and collect that data at the point of reporting, and then once it's in FRS and it's been sent to Sedgery or whatever the program is, then to try to figure out, well, we might have a need to update that data in the central repository FRS. We can do this via the FLA, and so this is really just an overview of the types of functions that we have there, and what we could look forward to as we begin to fold in other EPA programs, in particular Office of Air programs, into the FLA. So I believe now I will kick the presentation back to, who is it?
Hey, Matt. Joe.
Yep.
It looks like there was one more slide there. There we go. All right. Thank you, Matt and Mark. I think people kind of get the sense now when I was talking that, CAER is more than just like a singular tool or something. These are examples of projects and related activities that all kind of are ingredients, if you think of it that way, to a conceptual design for a shared system. In this case was the shared facility data. So I just wanted to end the presentation here and leave a little time for questions before 4 o'clock. But as I mentioned earlier, there are opportunities for state, local, tribal partners and industry to get involved. On this current slide are opportunities for state folks to get involved in a number of different aspects. The first one listed there is there's a facility integrated planning team. The contacts for those are shown there about the roles and business rules for managing facility data and the interactions and developing shared systems for the facility attributes, which is what we talked about on these 2 projects today. The second one is feedback on the new FRS data model, and that's Matt Kelly, who just provided an update on the data model. The beta testing of the SEC search download page, that was a piece of Mark's presentation on accessing SEC codes through the shared services. So questions about that can be through the contact shown there for states. The review of mock-ups on user interface for the R2R and SEDRI. So there are opportunities there to continue to review the wireframes and outputs of the products that Mark was describing, and ECOS is a contact for looking at that information. And then for the CAER PDT, the product design team and the R&D teams, which I was mentioning earlier in the presentation, there's a number of people you can contact for both the current teams and future teams. Kelly Poole at ECOS participates on the PDT. Michael Burton, myself, and Mark Wirt are contacts for, we're co-chairs on the PDT, so any of us can answer questions about what the PDT is currently doing, future projects, and the R&D teams. And then lastly, the CAER listserv, you can send an email to that contact point for joining the listserv. The next slide. And then for industries, since we do have a good percentage of industry participants today, learning about the functionalities of products that come out of CAER, and for example, the RTR project today, and the accumulation of user stories are very helpful to any of these CAER projects. And we can accept individual comments only, not group or trade association type comments, but individual comments can be sent to care@epa.gov, and in the form of, I'm a facility and I need to do this, or I need to report this way, or I need the capability to do this in this type of reporting system. Please send those to those, and we will move those to the appropriate team that's working on that aspect of the project. And then also you can join the CAER listserv as well at the shown site there. And then we'll also use the user stories on a Trello board that we use to just manage the user stories in a very easy to see way. And then the last slide. Second to last slide. Other questions, please visit the website. It's really, it's kept up to date with a lot of neat information about what's going on with e-enterprise. and the CAER project, and you can see both the background information, descriptions of the R&D projects, all the way down to the work plans that are involved with those, some detailed information on that. And also you can get access to the webinar recordings like today's and any other types of outreach material that we have available. And then just on the last slide, just so people get a concept of who all is involved with these projects. This is a list, and I have to note that this is not fully complete, and we have members coming into R&D teams that are not all up on here yet, but this is a list of people that have been involved over the last year from EPA, ECOS, other and state and local tribal agencies. We have anywhere from 15 to 20 states involved at any given time on different aspects of the project. So we feel like we've had really good collaboration, and this is just an example of some of the people that have been involved. So I'll stop there, and I guess Sarah, if there was questions that you wanted to try to answer with the time we have left.
Yeah, we can go ahead and head into the question and answer session now. Just as a reminder, if people haven't already submitted your questions in the question box on the control panel, you can go ahead and do that now. If we do run out of time and are unable to get to everyone's questions, we'll go ahead and send answers to those questions following the webinar. So let's see what we have. So the first question is, how is the FLA determining whether a zip is valid or not?
Sarah, did you say whether or not a zip is valid?
Yes.
Okay, so in FRS we have a number of routines that we run to try to figure out if the address that is submitted to FRS is valid or not. So a couple of those routines rely on USPS and NAVTEC data to try to help figure that out. And so one of the, I'll call it a subroutine we run is we attempt to take the address, compare it with what USPS and NAVTEC have, and to see if that zip code lines up correctly. And that is actually one of the flags that we have in FRS is in FLA, is that if a zip isn't correct, we're able to pick that up and suggest that change to our network of data stewards, so that in the report there's a flagged for certain reasons report. They can go in there and see, hey, this is flagged because the zip code appears to be incorrect because of the standardization and matching routine and the use of USPS and NAVTEC really put into question whether or not that data is valid. And then of course a good old-fashioned Googling helps as well, where if a data steward isn't sure, there's still some question marks, they could just Google that address and use the different tools that are available on the web to try to figure that out.
Great, thank you. We'll move into the next question, which is, what is the lag time between data being reported and sharing the data with state, local, and tribal agencies?
What is that the context? Is it from CAER or for FRS?
I think probably, this is Mark, I think that the context is probably, given when the question came in right at the end of my presentation, is probably collecting it for RTR, when that might be available for sharing with the SLTs. So, the vision is that it would be, there wouldn't be much of a lag time at all once the data has been QA'd in FRS. The data would be available as SEDRI records is what we would envision right now within FRS. And what we haven't done is in terms of deciding, well, what will our work practices be, our business rules be for allowing that information to be used for things. That's where we don't really know right now, and I think the states would kind of need to learn about that and that information coming in, and what do we do if somebody's inadvertently provided something that then needs to get edited later, corrected later, or whatever. So I think that technically it could be very quickly, hours, but practically it may need to we may need to put some work practices in place to make sure people aren't spinning their wheels.
Okay, thanks. The next question is, will entering facility data into Sedgry be required? This person expresses that they're concerned because they're not staffed for this vast amount of data entry.
Right, so Bob or Keaton, do you want to try to take that one if you're available? Can other people talk, or is that possible, Sarah?
I can unmute people, but they don't currently have the capability.
Maybe unmute Keaton and see if he's available to answer that question.
Okay, one moment. Okay. Keaton, are you able to speak?
Maybe not. That's okay. We're going to have, so the current plans are that that would not be the case. So that just because your facility is in Sedgry or your facility exists, there's no plans to require all of this information to be provided. What does happen from time to time is we issue information collection requests for the RTR program, and those do require this detailed level of information to come in, and usually that in the past has been through spreadsheets. And that, like I said, the bulk upload approach would continue to be done through spreadsheets. So we're working with upcoming RTR efforts to coordinate the use of those spreadsheets to then be able to load the information into FRS. So from users' perspective who don't have the capability to, or don't want to use the on-screen entry, filling out their spreadsheet for the ICR that they've been asked to do would be the same from their perspective, and that can be uploaded. And we're also still allowing people to mail in their spreadsheets is our current plan. So hopefully, if you're not affected by ICRs, then there would definitely be no requirement for you to add this information. It would be voluntarily available, but not required.
Great, thank you. So we'll move to the next question. It's who has access to the facility linkage application? Is that something that will be a tool for end users or on the back end for EPA?
So the tool is available to EPA programs, regional staff, and state as well as tribal users. Of course, access through the firewall and all that good stuff. But with tools like RTR and Sedgry and Try.me Web that leverage the technology, it is kind of in a way getting at the curation of facility data in FRS. And that's why we're so excited about the technology and working with programs like Office of AER. So the tool is available to EPA states, programs, and tribal users, and as well as our regional staff, and that's about it.
Okay, next question is, there are many discrepancies between TRI reporting requirements and NEI requirements, such as submittal deadlines, chemical definitions, basis of estimates, etc. Is EPA planning to propose harmonization measures in the Federal Register to improve emissions comparability?
So I'll take a stab at that one, Sarah. So right at this moment, we are not embarking on regulatory changes to program requirements. So initially the focus is on how potentially we could share the data across the programs. We realize there's a number of questions like the one that you just raised here from the audience about timing and the different requirements, and specifically, how it differs from hazardous air pollutant emission that goes to TRI, and at what level it goes at versus what goes to NEI. That these questions will come up at the point at which the actual development of a shared platform and the mechanism for making it work happens. At this point, we are focusing principally right now just on the mechanics of creating the basis for even sharing the data to begin with. You know, defining the pollutant, establishing at what level, you know, defining these differences that the questioner raised, and then the next step would be determining would this necessarily require a change in regulations? Is that possible? Is it a small change, or would it require? But you know, so those type of issues are being investigated now as part and parcel of these R&D teams, and that particular one would, I think, would fall into the second phase of the project I described as the TRI-NEI cross comparison, which would we anticipate would be you know, later this year to begin investigating those particular issues and what that would mean in terms of, you know, potentially even any regulatory type requirements.
Thank you. So someone had a clarifying question back to some of the other stuff we've referenced. So they said when they hear spreadsheets, they want to know if that means an Excel type file rather than Access or database.
Yeah, so right now for the RTR program, the user base is interested in spreadsheets, and so that's what we're focusing on. But the underlying data model has a you know, a schema that will potentially be able to accept other formats. And keeping in mind that existing data flows coming to CDX that go to NEI for facility attributes, you know, those will still be relevant here. So if that's the way data is getting to EPA from states currently, then those Access and XML schema formats that we use for the NEI program are still relevant.
Okay. So we have someone who's wondering how this will affect the manufacturing site, given that the emissions are being reported through TRI GHG databases.
I don't understand the question.
Let's see. So it looks like they want to know if, and this was a few minutes ago, so I'm not sure what exactly it was in reference to, but they want to know the effect on manufacturing site. Their emissions are reported through TRI greenhouse gas databases. And yeah, I don't have any clarification beyond that. I can move to the next one if that isn't clear.
I think, Ravi, you would need to maybe try to elaborate on your question a little bit for us to try to be able to answer that. And,
okay, and
there were some
that.
questions that are higher up that we've missed.
Okay.
Will SLPs have an opportunity to QA the facility data model data? And that's an FRS question, I think.
Yeah, so then they can, and they would be able to, just with simply following up with me. If you go to our epa.gov/FRS, there's some resources that point to the FLA, and there's a registration process and all that good stuff. But one of the best, I guess, early steps you can take is just to shoot me an email or give me a call, and I could walk you through that process.
Okay, so we have a couple questions we haven't had the chance to get to. Did we want to answer those offline, or did we want to take a couple more? It looks like we're at 4 o'clock now.
Well, the question about accessibility to local programs, the same answer that Matt just gave for state programs would be true. Local programs would have access as well, right, Matt?
Yes, that's correct.
And then the last question is regarding the common emissions form availability, and we don't currently have a timetable for the common emissions form to be available for CAER. We don't have funding to get to that point, but we're, like Joe said, building up the pieces to get to that point in the absence of additional resources. And so once we have a timetable for that, that would be a part of a future CAER webinar.
Okay, great, thank you. So it looks like if we miss any others, we'll go through and we can go ahead and send responses following the webinar. Other than that, Joe, did you have any closing remarks?
No, thank everybody for participating today and our presenters, and look forward to speaking to you all the next time we have our updates.
Okay, great, thank you. And then just so everyone knows, we do have a survey that will automatically be launched when we close this webinar. We'd really appreciate if you guys could take the time to answer that. It's only 5 questions, so it should be very quick. And you'll also receive a link to the survey in a follow-up email right after this. All right, thank you, everyone.